I agree with Ray. I think we have not had decent penetration of Russian. The goal of the CIA was to recruit people who would be in significant roles in the highest levels of governments, say in Russia and China, so that we would know what they're actually thinking. Not that we could necessarily manipulate them, but that we would actually have intelligence about what were their plans, what were their intents. The book that was written about the history of the CIA over the last 75 years made the point that the CIA never really had any kind of successes at that level. So we've got, and then on top of it, the people that are going in are academics who have been brainwashed into a particular worldview. You don't get embraced anymore in any part of the intelligence community for standing up and saying, you know what, Russia's not our enemy. Russia has changed. It's fundamentally changed. It's not some hidden secret communist empire waiting to spring out and take control of the world. It's a new republic, and it's back in touch with traditional Russian values and the religious values that founded it over 1,000 years ago. They don't get that. And so that, look, Ray and I have been saying all along as this war was unfolding, what was, I think our assessments were far more accurate than anything that was being put out by the intelligence community, up to and including the notion that they accept at face value that the Russians have suffered massive casualties. Again, another provable lie.
Larry Johnson's remarks expose the deep flaws within the U.S. intelligence apparatus, particularly when it comes to understanding nations like Russia. He highlights a troubling lack of insight into Russian leadership and intentions, driven not by technical limitations but by ideological blinders and institutional failures that have plagued the CIA for decades. For decades, the CIA and other agencies have struggled to penetrate the inner circles of key adversaries, leaving policymakers blind to the true intentions and strategies of nations like Russia and China. This deficiency is more than a tactical shortfall. It reflects deeper cultural and ideological problems that compromise America's ability to navigate the complex realities of a multipolar world. The CIA was established with the mission of gathering and analyzing intelligence to provide an edge in global affairs. However, as Johnson points out, it has consistently failed to infiltrate the upper echelons of power in rival nations. The inability to recruit insiders within the Kremlin, Beijing, or other key power centers means the U.S. relies heavily on speculation, propaganda, and secondary sources. Johnson emphasizes a glaring weakness: the CIA's inability to infiltrate the highest levels of Russian government. This failure isn't new. As the book chronicling the CIA's 75-year history points out, the agency has repeatedly struggled to recruit meaningful assets at senior levels of foreign governments. Despite massive budgets and decades of effort, U.S. intelligence has little insight into the inner workings of Russian decision-making. This failure leaves the U.S. operating in a fog, relying on assumptions and propaganda rather than real intelligence. Without credible sources within the Kremlin or other key institutions, policymakers are forced to make decisions based on incomplete or inaccurate information, decisions that can escalate conflicts unnecessarily or overlook opportunities for de-escalation. Johnson's critique doesn't stop at operational failures. He draws attention to a pervasive ideological problem within the intelligence community. He argues that many analysts and operatives have been indoctrinated with a rigid worldview, one that views Russia as a perpetual enemy rather than a nation undergoing significant transformation. This worldview blinds analysts to the reality of modern Russia. As Johnson points out, Russia today is not the Soviet Union. It has evolved into a republic rooted in traditional values, including a revival of Orthodox Christianity and a reassertion of its national identity. These changes are not hidden. They are openly discussed by Russian leaders and reflected in the country's policies. Yet, the intelligence community continues to operate as if Russia were still the USSR, stuck in a Cold War mindset that distorts its assessments. This ideological rigidity discourages dissenting voices within the intelligence community. Those who challenge the prevailing narrative, who argue that Russia is not the existential threat it is often portrayed as, are marginalized or ignored. As a result, the U.S. often misjudges Russian intentions and capabilities, leading to policies that are counterproductive or even dangerous. Johnson also takes aim at the intelligence community's narrative surrounding the war in Ukraine. He and others, like Ray McGovern, have consistently argued that the official assessments of Russian casualties and setbacks are wildly exaggerated. According to Johnson, these narratives are not only inaccurate but also deliberately misleading, designed to bolster public support for U.S. and NATO involvement in the conflict. For instance, claims that Russia has suffered massive casualties have been repeated by Western media and officials, despite evidence to the contrary. These claims create a false sense of progress for Ukraine, masking the reality that Russia remains militarily and economically resilient. This misinformation fuels policies that prolong the war, rather than seeking avenues for negotiation or peace. One of Johnson's most striking points is his call for a fundamental reevaluation of how the U.S. views Russia. He argues that Russia is not an aggressive empire bent on global domination, but a nation focused on preserving its sovereignty and cultural identity. Its actions, including its involvement in Ukraine, must be understood within this context, not as unprovoked aggression but as responses to what it perceives as threats to its national security and interests. This perspective is rarely acknowledged in Washington, where the narrative of Russia as an eternal adversary dominates. Yet, understanding Russia on its own terms is essential for crafting policies that reduce tensions and avoid unnecessary conflicts. The intelligence community's failures and biases have real-world consequences. Misjudging Russia's intentions and capabilities has led to a series of strategic missteps, from the expansion of NATO to the handling of the Ukraine conflict. These policies have not only heightened tensions with Russia, but also undermined U.S. credibility and leadership on the global stage. Moreover, the reliance on propaganda and wishful thinking over hard intelligence has eroded trust in the intelligence community itself. As Johnson and McGovern argue, the public and policymakers deserve accurate information, not politically convenient narratives. Without this transparency, the U.S. risks repeating the mistakes of the past, with potentially disastrous consequences. Johnson's critique highlights the urgent need for reform within the intelligence community. This reform must go beyond operational improvements to address the deeper cultural and ideological issues that distort its work. First, the intelligence community must prioritize intellectual diversity, encouraging analysts to challenge prevailing narratives and explore alternative perspectives. This includes re-examining assumptions about countries like Russia and recognizing the changes they have undergone. Second, it must rebuild its human intelligence capabilities, focusing on recruiting credible sources at the highest levels of foreign governments. Without this, the U.S. will remain blind to the intentions of key adversaries and competitors. Finally, the intelligence community must commit to greater transparency and accountability. It must provide policymakers and the public with honest assessments, even when those assessments are politically inconvenient. Only then can it regain the trust and credibility it has lost. Larry Johnson's insights reveal the systemic flaws in how the U.S. approaches intelligence and foreign policy. From the failure to penetrate Russian leadership to the ideological biases that cloud its judgment, the intelligence community faces significant challenges. Addressing these issues is not just a matter of improving operations. It is essential for ensuring that U.S. policies are grounded in reality and capable of navigating an increasingly complex global landscape. By confronting these shortcomings and embracing a more honest, nuanced approach, the U.S. can move toward a foreign policy that prioritizes stability, understanding, and genuine security. According to Larry Johnson, I agree with Ray. I think our intelligence efforts, particularly with Russia, have been severely lacking. The CIA's goal was always to recruit individuals in key roles within the highest levels of governments, whether in Russia or China, to gain insight into their plans and intentions, not necessarily to manipulate them, but to obtain genuine intelligence. The book chronicling the CIA's 75-year history highlights this shortcoming. It points out that the agency has never had significant successes in penetrating those upper echelons. To make matters worse, the people now entering the intelligence community are often academics who have been indoctrinated into a rigid worldview. Independent thinking is no longer welcomed. If someone were to stand up and say, "Russia isn't our enemy," It's fundamentally changed and is no longer a hidden communist empire but a new republic rooted in traditional and religious values. They'd be ostracized. This lack of understanding has led to poor assessments. Ray and I have consistently pointed out that our evaluations of this war have been far more accurate than those from the intelligence community. For example, the claim that Russia has suffered massive casualties is another provable falsehood the intelligence community accepted at face value. Thanks for watching.